Hello, I'm Robin Kinderman with the New American Magazine, and I'm here today with Joseph Loughlin, author of Shots Fired, The Misunderstandings, Misconceptions, and Myths About Police Shootings. Joe Loughlin is the former Assistant Chief of Police of Portland, Maine, and where he served for 30 years and held every sworn rank in his department. So today I'm going to interview him as a book review of Shots Fired. All right, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Robin. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. All right, so in the beginning of your book, you state that it was the events in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 that inspired you to write. But you retired in 2010, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So what were you doing at that time, or what did you see that inspired you to write this book?
Well, let me preface it by saying first I was writing another book called No Reason. It's a rhetorical title, and it spanned the gauntlet of many police stories, everything from homicide to politics to the drug problem to undercover operations. And in that book, I had a section dedicated to officers who were involved in deadly force incidents, and most of which I was on scene after they had used deadly force. And the trauma and the terrible, piercingly painful effect it had on them, contrary to what's portrayed in the media, the TV and movies, it's not like that. So when the Michael Brown incident happened and the nation convulsed into hands up, don't shoot, and all this anti-police rhetoric, and I was watching it on TV, Robin, and I'm just saying, I don't think it happened. With all my experience in police work, I said, there's no way it happened that way, sure, unless the police officer went crazy or something unusual happened, which does happen on certain occasions. And then, of course, we know definitively now, through the Department of Justice and all the other investigations and medical examiners and private investigators and civil suits, that whole thing never happened. Right. But look what happened to the country. The damage, the riots, the constant pernicious, negative, and pervasive rhetoric against police, which, by the way, are human beings. I was inspired to write about deadly force. So I went up and down the East Coast and all over the country talking to officers who were involved in these incidents and what happened to them as human beings and people. And I don't want to keep going with, you may answer some of your questions, but to a man or a woman, they said, I wish it never happened. I never expected it to happen. It was a routine call. This devastated my life, and that is the common denominator. Mm-hmm. Real life is not TV or movies, but unfortunately, most of the American public, by and large, is trained and educated by TV, movies, video games, and that's not real life. Real life is disturbing, grotesque, and permanent, like I said before.
Mm-hmm. And digging into that, you also wrote that our current situation is a culmination of a sense of injustice and a loss of dignity, not just at the hands of police, but by a social system that has let many people down. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, that's really interesting, is that first of all, people have very little realistic information about what police do every single day in this country. And most of their time is spent shuttling people through the myriad of social service systems. In fact, I'd go as far as 70% of our time is dealing with the drugged, the desperate, the deranged, the abused, and we're moving them through all the broken societal ills or all these organizations that don't necessarily work. That's what we're doing most of the time. Whether it's a mentally ill person at 2 in the morning or a terrible sexual child abuse case, domestic violence, all these things that we deal with that people don't see. Mm-hmm. You'll see a police officer sitting in a car doing a report or something like that, or maybe having a coffee. You have no idea what that individual has been. So to follow up with your question, we deal with a lot of society's problems. They've left it at the doorstep of police. It really almost shouldn't be called law enforcement. We're dealing with so much now that everybody is dumping on the police, mentally ill, dumping on the police, homeless, dumping on the police, and we weren't meant to do that. And then you put in the mix of 911 calls and all the horrible things that we deal with, and like I say, here's a good statement. Police operate and function in a world that goes well beyond the normal experience of anybody. What we see in one shift alone, people may not see in their entire lives. And I know this, having coming out of college, never wanting to be a police officer. In fact, I had a pretty sophomoric skewed view on police. And I inadvertently got involved, and I was stunned about what I saw. And I also, most police, people who want to be police, it's a calling, and they go into it, to help, to do something bigger than them. For me, it was like the big Boy Scouts, it's a great feeling to be able to help people in crisis. You know, the last thing we want to do is be involved in a deadly force thing.
Okay. So your book is divided into sections that address the misconceptions and questions that many of us have, such as, why did the officer fire so many times? Why did he shoot an unarmed person, etc.? And your book is very thorough. Did you ask civilians to get these questions? Like, how did you come up with the questions that people have?
Well, because you've heard it so much in the media. You know, once again, the police have killed another unarmed person. You know, the police shot 46 times. The police shot someone in the back. You know, they're treating it like it's an entity of commodities that are out there looking to do harm or target a certain segment of our population. That's not true. You know, let's go with one of the biggest myths: unarmed. Every year in this country, 3,000 plus people are killed by unarmed persons. You know, like we say in police work, hands kill. People are stomped to death, choked, strangled, beaten. Every year also, 11% of police officers are killed by totally unarmed persons. Our perspective, unarmed has a total different meaning for us. You see, people are capable of doing incredible superhuman, feats. If they're on drugs, crack, PCP, rage, adrenaline, it's stunning what you can witness. How you go to a violent domestic, for instance, and I've seen a big, strong guy or even small guys throw 4, 5, 6 police officers around. That's when we use less lethal means to take people into custody. But an unarmed person, every year police officers have their guns taken away, they're killed, they're beaten to death, and this is all conveniently dismissed by the media. You'll never hear about these cases. So unarmed people can be dangerous.
Right.
And especially women out there that are listening have seen in terrible domestic violence cases what a person can do in 3 seconds with their hands.
Well, one of the cases in your book that stuck out in my mind was a really good example of that. There was a female police officer that was on her break,
Right.
Stopped to get a soda,
Right.
and a gentleman started urinating in front of her car.
Right.
And she stepped out just to ask him to stop, and he turned on her, charged her, and took her baton and started
Right.
beating her.
Right.
And her only choice was to shoot him.
Right. So the guy ripped the baton out of her
Yep.
hand as she was trying to keep him away,
Yep.
knocked her on the ground, and started beating her, to death.
Yes.
And that's when somehow she was able to get her weapon out, and she killed a man. But she was devastated by that event.
Yeah.
This is another thing. After these events, the officers are devastated and bewildered. The average shooting happens in 3 seconds. And I tell people there's no pithy dialogue. It's not Hollywood TV movies. These routine calls, that's a routine example. Most of the examples in the book are routine calls, whether it's a shoplifting, a noise complaint, a routine traffic stop that explodes into violence. Our day, we're negotiating from one thorny human situation to the next, and oftentimes with no good answers. And every day is punctuated by violence. So anything can erupt into something. So our perspective is very different. And again, people have very little realistic information about what we do.
Right. Now, most of the incidents in this book take place in your own department in Portland.
No, there's maybe 4 or 5 of them.
Oh, okay.
I think in my memory there's a couple coming to mind. It starts out of my city with one of my officers getting stabbed 11 times, and a rookie policeman having to kill the man. And it illustrates all the complexities around that. And here's a good thing, Robin. When police go to a scene, even when I pull up on a horrific crime scene or a shooting, it takes us hours to figure out the basics of the positioning, the forensics, where everybody was, what happened. And that first story illustrates that perfectly.
Well, yeah, because wasn't the police officer, he was chasing the man upstairs,
Right, yeah,
right?
you remember,
in a
yeah,
garage.
yeah.
And then they fell down. There wasn't
Right.
any light, so that
Yeah,
had
these
to
things
be,
happen in low light, bad
Yeah.
weather, poor terrain. Human abilities are different for each person. It's all unpredictable, and no one case is the same. But the media, Facebook, Twitter, all those things that go out there, Instagram, the police did it again. They killed someone for no reason.
Right.
That was my first book I was going to write, No Reason, which is a common expression that people say. I got arrested for no reason. I beat her for no reason. It's common. But yeah, it's a bewildering, terrible event with no good outcomes.
Right. Now, in your book, you also spend a significant amount of time explaining the lack of mental and emotional services available to officers after
one.
these shooting incidents.
Right.
Did you experience that firsthand at all? Lack of support? Did you ever
Yes.
have to?
No, here's a good point. I'm
Fortunately.
glad you asked me that. I'm glad you asked me that. Most officers, the vast majority of officers, go through their entire careers without ever using deadly force. 96% don't ever use deadly force, self-included. Now, I've been in, thousands of violent situations. I used to be the commander of the SWAT team when I was younger, and I've been in some horrific, terrifying, scary situations. And it's a great feeling, I expressed this before, to take someone into custody, get them help, get them to prison or whatever, when you don't harm them and the neighborhood's not harmed and people aren't hurt. That's a great feeling. But yeah, that's a great question. Most cops do not use deadly force. But look what happened in this country. People were told, our communities, our society was told that there's an epidemic of police shootings. Right. It's not true. And if you look at the real statistics and real information, it doesn't even come close to what people have been told. And you saw the same 5 or 6 videos played over and over again to get into the psyche of the American people that this is a problem, cops are out of control, and they're looking to engage in deadly force. It's quite the contrary. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to be involved in these incidents.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking that Portland did have a very good
we did, and it was
support.
a result of the first case that I described. I went to a couple, as a young officer, young commander, I went to a couple of shooting scenes where the officer had to use deadly force, and they were destroyed. And then it was a very complex undertaking to reconstruct these scenes. So we developed policy, post-shooting policies of, if we have this happen again, this is another thing people don't know. Police are always looking for better ways to do business, create better policies, better education, and better training. So we develop policies to address that and to address, the humanity behind the badge, the care and wellness of the officer after the event, because they're going to have nightmares, they're going to have physical illness, they're going to have residual effects that affect them forever. There's a lot of psychological and physiological trauma that will happen afterwards, contrary to what's portrayed out there. Okay. Not TV.
So now some people who read this book, they might say, oh, it's just part of an agenda. You're just trying to get civilians to look away, or just let police do what they want and continue to abuse their power.
Absurd. That's absurd. Most police officers, again, are out. The book does not excuse bad cops, poor tactics that may lead to a horrible mistake, or horrible, terrible mistakes in violent circumstances, or pulling up the wrong way to something that's evolving. It doesn't excuse that. But this book is meant to give people some real information. Again, the American public has been told wrong information. I don't want to say a lie almost. It's not true. And I'm trying to talk about the humanity behind the badge and the fact that cops don't want to be engaged in deadly force. I'll tell you why. All of us see other police officers have gone through this. It affects their lives permanently. During all my interviews in this book, I had to stop the tape every single time because the officer got emotional, they started crying. I have dozens that were in this book that couldn't partake in the book. They got so emotional and so upset, sometimes physically ill. It's devastating. I'm trying to impart a reality that people aren't exposed to. My own experience. I was a very liberal-minded college kid, no idea that I'd be a police officer. I was going in a totally different direction. And I was stunned when I became a police officer of what I was seeing and what good I can do. So the book is not, if you read the book, you're going to get a good insight into what really happens rather than what's portrayed in the media or movies. In one single movie, like, cops will kill like 4 or 5 people. It's absurd.
Right, and then
but
they
people
just walk away.
And they walk away.
Yeah.
It doesn't. People do not walk away unscathed. These events are traumatic, devastating, and permanent. Even in the book, 15, 20 years later, the officers, I don't want to. I can't talk about it. I don't want to deal with this. It's horrible. I wish it never happened. Many of them quit the force. Some commit suicide. Yeah. It's horrible living with the fact that you've killed a human being, especially if you're raised with good ethics, good character, good moral beliefs, spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs. It's horrible. It's a horrible situation.
So, if you just had to explain this book, in 5 words or less to somebody, say myself, off the street, what would you say?
I would say take a look at the human beings behind the badge. Take a look at reality. These are real interviews with identified officers. That's a lot more than 5 words, Robin.
It's simple though, and it's to the point.
Yeah, these are real interviews with officers, and who have identified themselves, are brave enough to come forward to tell their stories about what happens during these events. You know, and I'm hoping that it makes a difference in our country and in our society, because we're in trouble right now.
Yes, we are. I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.